I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Friday. Friday, we have the Healing Circle. I'm glad that I've got my friends and colleagues, elders in our community, to discuss an important topic today. We're dealing with domestic abuse, violence in and among our families. Before that, let me invite you all to support this work, support this conversation. Go to the Insight News uh, YouTube channel and subscribe, like, and share. Go to Insight News YouTube channel, subscribe, like, and share. I'm saying this because you might be joining us from any number of platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and we are grateful for having all of these modalities for engagement. But we're trying to build as our primary source of engagement and of growth the Insight News YouTube channel. We've got around 300 subscribers now. We want 1,000, and we want to ask you to share this program to your networks, to your friends, to your contacts, your colleagues, and invite them to join us by subscribing. Doesn't cost anything, but it helps us grow this community to expand the conversation. The conversation is important. Our idea is that we owe it to ourselves to describe our truth, our reality, our analysis of the past, and our expectations for the future, to see ourselves and talk about ourselves as co-creators of the future that we desire, and to believe that victory is both inevitable and imminent, and we walk that way and talk that way. Well, I want to start today, as I've been doing of late, talking about what we call the hot topics that we've assembled. I've got a couple of things that I want to share with you, and one is that there's a question of Minnesota making moves to be carbon free. There's an article in the upcoming edition of our presently on Insight News, our website, insightnews.com. Go there also. That says Minnesota moves towards 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. It's an article by Steve Karnowski, an article that we are taking from the Associated Press, and it's dated yesterday. And the article says that Minnesota utilities would be obligated to transition to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040 to step up the fight against climate change under a bill that's now speeding through the legislature. The bill was slated for a final vote on the Senate floor Thursday night after passing the House on a 70-60 vote last week. It's a top priority for Democrats who control both chambers and for Democratic Governor Tim Walz, who's made it an important part of his climate agenda. Climate change is coming and has been here. It affects everything we do, said the lead author, Democratic Senator Nick Friends of North Mankato. And Friends goes on to say that the debate will probably go on for a while, but it's a critical part. Let me move my notes here so I can read the balance of this. In this discussion, the Senate's two meteorologists, one is Nicole Mitchell of Woodbury and Robert Kupak of Moorhead. They're both elected, but they're also meteorologists. They detailed for their colleagues how climate change is accelerating across Minnesota. They said that it's leading to more extreme weather events, as well as hotter summers with more droughts and warmer winters and shorter ice fishing seasons. Well, I'm pleased to bring this discussion to you for two reasons. One, it's necessary that we arm ourselves with information about the environment, about the climate, because the people who are most affected and most quickly affected and most negatively affected by the consequences of unbridled, unthinking pursuit of the decimation of opportunity in pursuit of greed, right? The people affected by that most are our people, not only here, but globally. And so it's important that the conversation with Al McFarlane, forums like this, begin to have these conversations to get our people acclimated to the language of environment, the language of climate, so that we can begin to advance ideas that represent our interest, our survival, our sustainability, and that in doing so represent the best hope for all of humanity and for the world to live in alignment with nature and climate, not against it. So we have to pay attention. The other hot topic that I want to share today is an article that's you know also in Insight News, and it's something that is uh, a, not touchy, but a critical issue. Minneapolis it says, has made little progress on homeless encampments in 2022. And the question is why. This is an article from Minnesota Public Radio News by reporter Grace Burns Stengel. And the report says that Minneapolis, well, let me just read a few paragraphs of it. This was first posted on February 1st at 4 in the morning and updated February 2nd. The story reads, Matthew Ichikawa was in shock. He'd seen tent encampments evicted all over Minneapolis for years now. Some he lived at, some he didn't. But this clearing was different. Open quote. I've not seen this type of effort for this size camp ever. Like, I can't believe, Ichakawa said shortly after police entered the encampment in South Minneapolis neighborhood east of Phillips before 7 a.m. He and dozens of others have been staying in an empty lot just above the Midtown Greenway for months. Volunteers routinely delivered meals, basic necessities, and supplies like naloxone, I think it's called, the medicine used to reverse opioid overdose. Ichikawa sat on his bike in the middle of the Bloomington Avenue that morning in September, watching as city dump trucks hauled out what was left after police forced residents to leave without time to gather their things. The story goes on to describe that the city has torn down encampments many times before, but there was something new. They're saying this time they taped off the encampment area for several blocks in all directions, like it was a crime scene. They prevented anyone from entering past the yellow line. And to Ichikawa, this is the way they were handling these encampments had changed. The police won't even talk to us, he said. We've asked them several questions. They give us a cold shoulder. Unsheltered homelessness has been an increasingly visible issue in Minneapolis for years, becoming top of mind for many residents in 2018 with what became called the Wall of Forgotten Natives, where hundreds of people, mostly indigenous, lived in tents along Franklin and Hiawatha Avenue. At that time, it was widely considered the largest homeless encampment in Minnesota history. I'll stop reading there. And I just want you to think about that, to sit on that, sit in it, get a sense of what is our obligation for responding to people that are quote unquote homeless or without housing, or who choose different housing options. What should public policy be? What is our responsibility to these neighbors? What is it? So I ask you to join me in thinking about that. Well, let me begin now by bringing in my colleagues and my leader, Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya. She is the leader at Brakens Consulting and Psychological Services. She's the leader of the African American Child Wellness Institute that sponsors this project. And she convenes the Healing Circle along with our team every week. And also Dr. Oliver Williams is here, who is a noted thinker, leader, organizer, guru in the area of domestic abuse awareness, both here and around the world. And we all are pleased to be joined by a wonderful new guest and leader in community in the world, Sister Mildred Muhammad. She's an award-winning global keynote speaker. I'll say more about her momentarily. But first, let me talk to or ask Dr. B to jump in and set the table for us this morning or today for the talking circle. or the healing circle, sorry. And unmute Dr. B. There we go.
I said it is a talking circle as well as a healing circle. So I think we're good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here again. My name is Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya, and I am president of Bracken's Consulting and Psychological Services. And I'm also the executive director of the African American Child Wellness Institute. And as we sit here today, looking at the issues of domestic violence and creating an environment for domestic peace, we do like the Sankofa bird. We fly forward, but we still look back so that we won't repeat the mistakes we've made in the past and that we learn from them. We always convene this special hour on Friday to talk about our hurts and our healing. And we do it in a circle because in the African tradition, the circle is a space of power because everyone in the circle has equal access to the center, which is where the voice is heard. In the circle, we honor our elders because their wisdom is greater than ours. And we honor our elders because they're closest to our ancestors. And we honor our ancestors because they're closest to our Creator. So today, as we sit in circle, we remember all the voices of those who've gone before us with the hope and dream of those who will follow us. We also understand that in African tradition, this circle is very orderly. And in the orderly, respectful manner, we use a talking stick. Now, we know we are separated by time and distance, but spiritually, we're in circle. And so we use a virtual talking stick to pass it to anyone in the circle. And as the circle goes from one person to another, it gives everyone a chance to have voice. And so we have it that if you've got something that's burning, an issue that's burning your ears and you want to talk about it right away, you ask for the circle. You ask for the talking stick and the power of the circle, and it is passed to you. So with that, I want to welcome all of our guests today, those who are our listeners for the first time, and those who have been long-standing patrons of our group. I ask you to join us today as we step into the healing circle. And I pass it to our leader again, Baba Al McFarlane. So here's the talking stick.
I take it. Thank you, Dr. B. Let me introduce Mildred Muhammad. I'm going to do this introduction, but then pass the talking stick to Dr. Oliver Williams to do the next introduction of his friend and colleague, but also of the topic, because I think that there's no better way for us to really get into this conversation about domestic violence than having that kind of introduction. So Mildred D. Muhammad is an award-winning global keynote speaker. She's an international expert for the U.S. State Department. She's a certified consultant with the U.S. Department of Justice in the Office for Victims of Crime. She's a CNN contributor, a domestic abuse survivor, a certified domestic violence advocate. She's an advisory board member and public speaking instructor for the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. She's got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. She's a best-selling author, trainer, an educator, a certified professional and personal development consultant, and she's received the 2022 Who's Who in America Albert Nelson Marquis Lifetime Achievement Award. Well, you know, I can just tell you that she travels around the world speaking, and one of the things she talks about is her story as the ex-wife of the person we know as the DC sniper. She discusses her life of terror, of abuse, of heartbreak, and at the same time promotes domestic abuse violence awareness and prevention. She's recognized as one of the nation's most powerful advocates for victims and survivors of domestic violence. Well, so pleased to have you here, Sister Mildred D. Muhammad. I'm going to pass the talking stick to Dr. Oliver Williams. Dr. Williams, I'll let you take it from there and start the conversation. You set it up, and let's talk about it and follow that direction. We'll have some questions. We'll make them all happen. Dr. Williams, here's the talking stick.
It's great to have my friend with us and having a chance to talk about the issue of domestic violence and also talk about it in ways sometimes that we haven't talked about. As we've had conversations, and as people have been aware of Mildred's story, and there's some things that people were not aware of in terms of what she needed to do to be able to survive, and also issues associated with motherhood in the midst of all of that. So Mildred's kind of hung out with me periodically for different things, either a round table or a conference, and we've had a chance to talk about things intimately over the years. So we're set to be illuminated in a real sense. And so it's good to see you, Mildred, and thanks for accepting the invitation. So, and one of the things that I wanted to cover with you, Mildred, is can you tell a little bit about your story and what people didn't know? I mean, so for example, we heard about, this sniper that was going across the United States, but a lot of things that we didn't know was the fact that instead of it being a random sniper, it was really focused at trying to take you out. So can you kind of share and bring people up to speed with the reality of what your experiences were? And are you frozen, Mildred? Yeah.
She appears to be.
Okay. Yasmin, can you get in contact with it? Are you there? I see you.
I think she's unfrozen now. Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, Mildred. Can you kind of give people sort of an understanding about what you went through? And are you muted or no? You're muted? You're not muted. Well, I'm going to get started. Mm-hmm. And as we get started, maybe we can take care of the technical difficulties.
Go ahead, please.
But one of the things that people thought was the fact that it was a story about a sniper trying to take out people in different parts of the eastern United States. It started in Tacoma, Washington. And it wasn't a story about a person who was a sniper trying to take out people randomly. He was trying to kill Mildred. And also try to collect the funds that they put up to be able to catch this person who was going to use them to raise his children. And so, and the fact that he was in the military, and those are sets of issues that one needs to think about. Over the years, I had gotten calls from women whose husbands were in the military who were threatening them. But Mildred, can you talk a little bit more about it? I gave them a discussion a little bit about the fact that this wasn't a traditional, as people think of, domestic violence situation, but it wasn't just somebody trying to shoot somebody on the East Coast. It was somebody trying to harm you and to take the kids. So,
well, when we found out about the sniper shootings and what was going on, of course, everybody thought that it was someone that was randomly killing people, as did I and my family and my children. So it wasn't until October the 23rd when the ATF and the FBI came to my home and said that we need to put you into protective custody. They took us down to their headquarters or the police station, and that is when they told me that I was the intended target and they were going to put me and my family in protective custody. Many people don't know that. They wanted everyone to believe that it was two men, black men, in a Chevrolet killing innocent people to embezzle the government to put $10 million on a stolen credit card. That scenario would have been easy for you to believe because many people don't take domestic abuse and violence as seriously as they should. And while we're talking about domestic abuse and violence, we tend to lump everything under the title of domestic violence when the violent part of this issue is 20%. And there are 80% of us that do not have physical scars to prove that we are victims. And we pose the most difficult time in getting the help that we need because we don't have the scars. So if we could just start changing the narrative to domestic abuse and violence so that we can include the 80% that don't have the scars to prove that violence is really occurring. In order for a person who don't have the physical scars to get the help, they have to build their case, meaning you have to document in order to build your case. You can turn it over to the police, and that's the evidence that they will need in order to take action in your situation. Because it's hard enough as it is trying to get help with this because nobody really believes you, especially when you don't have scars. They don't even keep statistics on individuals making $250,000 above because they feel that those individuals in that tax bracket are not victims and they are not abusers.
Let me ask you, Sister Mildred, I'll take the talking stick, you and then Dr. B and Dr. Williams, to sit in that you just spoken, and that is that people don't differentiate. So let's come up with a working definition or definitions of domestic abuse. What are we missing from the domestic abuse discussion? How do we separate that, parse it out, and have a better understanding of what domestic abuse means? I'll pass the talking stick back to you, Sister Mildred, and maybe you would pass it to Dr. B and then Dr. Oliver Williams.
Right. But when we're talking about domestic abuse, the first assault to domestic abuse is a verbal assault. It's what I say and it's how you interpret what I say. Then that goes to emotional, psychological, economic, stalking, eventually a physical assault. So the 1 to 8 seconds is what I'm talking about, because we already know that every 9 to 15 seconds a woman is abused. The 1 to 8 seconds is what we tend to ignore because those are the abuses that it is difficult for law enforcement to act upon. Even if it's a threat, it has to be documented. You have to call it in. You have to try to find a way for other people to believe you before any type of action is coming forth to help you. And that's why you can't. Nobody's coming to save you. That's real. Nobody's coming to save you. You got to save yourself. You got to document. You have to set up with your neighbors or your family. Hey, if I call you and the phone ring one time, then please call the police for me. We have to start working as a community in this issue and stop saying, well, that's her problem. No, when her problem comes over into your house, then it's everybody's problem, because that's what happened with me. It was at home. And then he brought it into the community. And when it was brought to the community, nobody believed me when I was trying to get people to acknowledge that this is serious. They didn't want to believe me because I was too articulate to be a victim. And he was in the military and he wasn't going to do anything like that. Well, maybe you're just blowing this out of proportion. Then the victim blaming comes. Once they found out it was me, then it was, well, if you would have stayed with him, he just would have killed you. If you would have stayed on the West Coast, then the people on the East Coast would still be alive. How dare you call you and your children victims when none of you were hurt or killed? And how dare you bring this drama into this quiet community? So it's like, okay, so if I stayed and he killed me, then that would have been fine. But when I left and it affected everybody, then now I'm the problem. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get you to believe me? Because, you know, John, in the community, everybody liked him. He was that go-to guy when you need something, but they didn't want to believe me. And that's the hardest part, is when you're trying to get help. The first people you go to is family. And then you go to your clergy or your religious institution. And then you go to advocates. And then you find out nobody's coming to save me. Nobody's going to help me. I need to figure out how to do this on my own, because there's nobody coming.
What was the pre-1 to 8? You described this process that is kind of invisible, that everybody sees 8, 9, and 10, the physical abuse and damage that people wear and live through, or maybe not survive. And you described the less visible 1 through 8. But let me ask you to focus on the pre-1. You know, how did it get to, in your story, in your life and experience, how did that emerge to where you recognize that this is the first step in a process that unfolded over time?
Well, the verbal assault is when someone calls you out of your name, when they try to take away your confidence, or if you're smart about something, then they try to make you doubt who you are, gaslighting. They turn your family against you, within you. Oh, you know, your family, they don't like you anyway. You know, they like me better than you. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's true. Mm-hmm. And the constant, it gets to a point where you're not able to share who you are with your partner, because they're going to become envious or jealous or put you down because you know more than them. Or if you're trying to help them out, then they feel that you're just trying to take the praise for yourself. The economic is when you're working, I got to bring my check home, and then you distribute the money. I don't get any of that unless you give me. And then I have to ask you as if I'm a child. I have to ask you for the money. Then I have to tell you what I'm spending it on. And after I spend it, I have to bring a receipt back to you so that you can see how much I've spent. And if it's any money left over, I have to give it back to you. Or if I've overspent what I told you it was going to be, now I'm going to be berated because I was stupid. I should have had sense enough not to spend that money. Why didn't I calculate it out to make sure this is what it is? Then there's spiritual abuse, when you start using scripture to keep people in check. Well, you know, the Bible says this and the Quran says that and the Torah says this. Okay. And what? So you're trying to, especially if you know I'm on this spiritual journey to get closer to God, and then you're going to use that against me. That's going to help. It, in a sense, is going to make me learn the scriptures better so that I can combat you with that. But why should I have to do that? If we're on this journey together, then shouldn't we be feeding each other? Shouldn't we be a mutual conversation about how we're going to move forward? Then you have the stalking. When I decide to leave, now you're showing up at my job. You're calling people, talking about me. You're coming around, driving around in the car, or when I'm going to a store. How do you know I'm going to the store at this time? You just show up. So those are those things. That's the 1 to 8 seconds. They all kind of intermingle together. And then when I try to tell friends about it, those friends, you find out who your friends are. You find out who your friends are, and I found out who John's friends are. And everybody was John's friend, because I couldn't go to anybody. And when you are going through and you decide to leave an abusive relationship, only tell one person that you know if when I'm saying this, you're figuring in your mind who that one person is. So you know who that one person is that's going to help you out no matter what. Don't put it on social media. Don't tell his friends. Don't tell his mother. Don't her mother. Don't tell nobody but that one friend. Because the one thing that you have that is in your best interest is the element of surprise. That's what you got. And you got to hold on to that. And when you decide to go, then you make sure you have everything. I have a book called Planning My Escape. And in the back of the book, it lists all these items you need to take with you, the ones that are checked. You need those items to start your life over somewhere else. The other ones you can get later. But once you're ready to go, just go. Block all phones, change your email addresses, change your phone numbers, no contact. Tell your children too. They can't talk to mommy or daddy. They can't, we're give them some type of story that they will believe, especially when they're younger, because you have to use age appropriate language to discuss the abuse that's going on in your house. You can't tell a 5-year-old what you would tell a 15-year-old. You can't do that because the 5-year-old is going to be confused and the 15-year-old is going to ask you, why are you saying that? Age appropriate language for your children if you are in an abusive relationship. Age appropriate, because when my children were going through that, trying to get them to understand what had happened, I had to talk to each one of them separately because they were all 3 different ages and they all had a different understanding and a different love for their dad.
Before we ask Dr. B and Dr. Williams to take the talking stick, let me give our listeners and viewers a little more context. I pulled up the story about what was called the DC sniper attacks, and I'm pulling up the document from Wikipedia. Some people might not remember, might not have been around, or just have tucked this away, but this issue is so critical. And here's the information. It says the DC sniper attacks, also known as the Beltway sniper attacks, were a series of coordinated shootings that occurred during 3 weeks in October 2002 throughout the Washington metropolitan area, consisting of the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. 10 people were killed and 3 others were critically wounded. The snipers were John Allen Muhammad, age 41 at the time, and Lee Boyd Malvo, age 17 at the time, who traveled in a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice sedan. Their crime spree, which began in February of 2002, included murders and robberies in several states, which resulted in 7 deaths, 7 injuries. In total, the snipers killed 17 people and wounded 10 others for a 10-month span. The last paragraph I'll read is that in September 2003, Muhammad was sentenced to death. In October, Malvo, a juvenile, was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without parole. In November of 2009, Muhammad was executed by lethal injection. Wow, what a horrific
And in
story.
all of what you just read, you did not hear or see my name anywhere because they do not want you to associate the DC sniper shootings with domestic abuse and violence. Even when in the court, the judge would not allow me to testify. I only testified in the sentencing phase. And the jury said the reason why they gave him the death penalty is because they did not want him to finish what he started, which was to kill Mildred Muhammad. Even when they came with the 20-year anniversary, you didn't hear anything about me. They're trying to keep it just murders, just somebody out there shooting people for no reason. No, he had a reason. He brought his military job into a civilian sector. What was his job in the military? He was to go out into enemy territory, look at the bridges and the roads, blow them up, and leave quietly. Is that not what he did? He created a diversion, which was the innocent people when I was the target. He was shooting people around me.
Wow.
When they found that out, they put me and my family in protective custody, but they never told the public that I was the intended target until 10 years later. And they're still not doing it because there's so much sensationalism around this case that you cannot put a human element in this story to give people the truth about it. That's why it is by design that they are keeping the numbers down to the masses, the seriousness of domestic abuse and violence. Because if I told you the truth about this, there would be so much more of an uproar from the masses as to why aren't we helping these people the way that we should. There are more shelters in this country for animals than there are for women and children. But why should we need shelters anyway? Why should we need shelters? But that's the truth of the matter. That's where we are. We don't want to address it. We just want to say, oh, but you know, they can leave anytime they want to leave. No, we can't. Well, why do you stay? Why are you asking me, why do I stay? Why is that a question? That is the most victim blaming question that you can ask a victim of domestic abuse and violence. You should be asking the abuser, why do you abuse or terrorize your family in this manner? But society is just as afraid of the abuser as the victim is. So what do? You continue to beat down the victim because it's an easy target. But the abuser, oh, you know, we love him. He played football. He's a senator. He has all this money. He's this and he's that. Why would you want to say something so bad about him or her like that? I mean, what do you get out of that? Victim blaming. Like this person could never do something like that. No. That's why I call them Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, H-I-D-E, because they hide in plain sight.
You know, it started in Tacoma. Even though
Tacoma, Washington State on the West Coast.
Yeah, but it started in Tacoma, Washington before he moved to D.C. And with his
the reason,
go ahead,
the way he found me is he went to a father's rights group, told them I kidnapped our children. They did a skip trace on me, found me in the DC area and told him. He went to his best friend and said, hey, I found Mildred. She's in DC. I'm going to go get her. He said, you're not going to hurt her, are you? He didn't say anything. That best friend in the midst of the shootings called the FBI and said, hey, I don't know anything about your case, but you may want to look at John Allen Muhammad because his ex-wife is in the area and he may be there to hurt her. He called me and said, I had to think about it, but I did not want to see your name scrolling under the TV stating that you were killed and your children would not have a parent. That's why I called. He said, don't get it twisted. I don't care what those people tell you. Don't believe nothing they tell you. John was coming there to kill you. Make no mistake about that. That's my boy. I know him. He was coming to kill you. Those other people were collateral damage. That's what he said to me. So
and when
nobody wants to believe that.
No, I know that's true. And no, I was just going to say, when I've gotten calls from other women whose husbands or ex-husbands were in the military and they were talking about them reaching out, they would have a very, very similar story where they would have a conversation, but didn't feel as though programs were set up to be able to hear them or to respond to it, and or that they could hear part of it but not believe the other part. And so when you hear Mildred's story, there's so much to be able to unpack with regard to faith, with regard to, and one of the characteristics of men who batter is that they're very competitive with their partner.
Right.
And this notion that people struggle with, I think, is what does leadership mean? So as a man that's supposedly the leader of his family, the question of leadership, what do you mean? And I've heard an imam talk to me about faith, and he'd say that people would come up to them and say, well, you're not listening to the imam enough, and you're not practicing enough. And those are things in Christian communities and Islamic communities that people get challenged about in terms of knowing how to interpret it. So there's much more to say. And Mildred,
this is how I interpret that. As long, okay, so say he's the leader, fine, cool. As long as his hand is in the hands of God, fine. I will do as I'm supposed to do. However, when he takes his hand out is when the verbal abuse starts and all these other things start, then I am no longer obligated to follow you. I can leave. But a lot of us don't know that. We're not supposed to follow him to hell, so to speak. We're not supposed to do that. God did not intend for us to live a life of misery. He did not intend that. So they don't want us thinking for ourselves, because once you let a woman sit down and think, like you said, that's why the bombardment of constant chaos has to stay in place so that you can't think. If you can't think, you can't leave. You can't rationalize. Critical thinking does not exist if there's constant chaos going on in your head. You can't. So if you go somewhere by yourself, that's why. Where you going? I'm going with my friend. What y'all gonna talk about? Because I gotta know what you're talking about, so I can make sure I keep that on you, so you don't start thinking for yourself, so you can leave.
That's right. And one of the things, let me jump in here, sister, because one of the things, I love what you're saying, because two things you're really expressing very clearly, two things that I see a lot of women do, me included. First step is they start internalizing that they deserve to be punished somehow. That we learn from early childhood that when bad things happen to us, that's when we maybe get our first spanking because we did something wrong to deserve it. So we internalize somehow to check ourselves that there's some fault or flaw in us. Or sometimes our partners will say things like, you'll never find anybody who loves you like I love you. Ain't nobody gonna put up with you like that. You all of that. And, to me, they say all of that. And to me, that is one of the hooks. But the biggest thing I think that we see is sometimes we hook ourselves because we begin to believe the lie. We believe because our aunts, our uncles, our friends, Shanae, Pookie, them, everybody telling us there's something wrong with us for wanting to leave. He's a good guy. He's got a job. You need to be grateful. He gave you that. And that's not always the way it works. The other part I wanted to hit on that I think is even more critical for us to talk about is that we don't understand when we get to be adults that people can still be predators. We tell our children don't talk to strangers because we know they can get grabbed by predators. But we forget when we get grown and we get in those dysfunctional relationships with men who have power issues, emotional problems, and I'm seeing mental health diagnoses. We start losing our own power because we buy into it, but we also don't expect that as an adult, you're going to run into a predator. And what you described as predatory, because predators, think about it, they plan their prey, they look out for the prey, they sneak up on the prey, they have plans not to let the prey go away, but to kill the prey and consume it. So that belief of consuming your power, your control, your sense of who you are, that's what predators do. And too many of us, even today, are in predatory relationships. We think that if you're going to be abuse or domestic violence, that violence cannot be verbal, that violence cannot be physical use of one's presence, just standing in front of the door, or taking somebody's keys so they can't leave, or locking down a checkbook so they can't use it. All of those things, those are predatory, they're controlling, and they're unhealthy. And when we see that in a relationship, those are some flags that we need to be running like heck from a person who engages us like that. And the most important thing you said is that they isolate you. They want you not to have support. They want you not to think. They want you not to have family or anybody who can help you. And so as we talk about this as a psychologist, I just keep thinking about, how can we get this story to women? How can we get this story to women about themselves and exposure to predatory relationships for their children? Because children watch us and emulate what they think is a normal relationship in their own relationships. If we don't correct that experience, they'll take it, buy it, hold it, and sell it again in another relationship.
And you know, the one thing I wanted to make sure that we recognize that it's not just to women, but it's also to the community. Yeah. You know, when we've had conversations, and you've tried to go to faith houses to have conversations, and you want to bring up the topic of domestic violence, some people don't want to show up because they feel either that they're going to be outed. I've seen faith leaders who have been involved in domestic violence maybe put on one face to their partner, mm-hmm. but the partner knows the truth because mm-hmm. she's the one getting beat up. Mm-hmm. And then, but to the people that they may be preaching to, give them a different story than they're living at home.
Yeah.
But the thing and so we've got to be able to frame how we have those conversations. And sometimes it's being able to talk about relationships, yeah. And then sneak in something about domestic violence in there as you attract people to the conversation.
But doesn't this also remind you of slavery?
Isn't it a bait and switch though?
Yes, that's right. Doesn't it remind you of slavery? How they kept us under wraps by quoting scripture, saying, "Slave, obey your master." All of those scriptures were made to, they were, I would say, bastardizing what was in the Bible. And one of the scriptures in the Bible says that Jesus loved his church, that a man should love his wife as Jesus loved the church. But they don't know, they don't want to hear that scripture.
I think the thing is that with that, they've got to read the whole chapter. Because, and there's misinterpretations of faith text, not only in the Bible, but also in the Quran.
On the Quran.
And also in the Talmud.
Yep.
Correct. And so, and there, you know, we had Elizabeth Peterson, Dr. Elizabeth Peterson, who's in South Africa, who's got SAFI, this South African Faith and Family Institute. And she deals with Baha'i, she deals with traditional African spirituality, she deals with Hinduism, she deals with 2 different Muslim sects. Mm-hmm. And as we have conversations about it, one is to get the correct interpretation of the faith text, mm-hmm. because people misinterpret it for their own purposes, and in many different dimensions. If you go to the willtochange.org website, you'll see Speaking of Faith. But we have Muslim and Christian ministers and imams giving a correct interpretation of the text. But we also have documents that quote what the Quran has to say and what the Christian text has to say too, as we're trying to educate people around the United States and around the world.
Let me jump in. This is such a fascinating conversation. I've been just fascinatedly listening and not throwing questions in, as you know, I'm trained to do. But I have a question, and that is, how does class play into domestic violence? That's one question. The second question, Sister Muhammad, what, and then Doctor, what is the instruction for women so that they are protect themselves from abusive other people? And then what is the instruction for men so that they recognize abuse that they do own, create, accept, or excuse? How do we provide direction, training, awareness so that we don't expose each other to our deficiencies or actions based on whatever it is that drives our bad acting? Sister, what do you think first, and then maybe come back to Dr. Williams and Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya?
Well, abusers know they are abusers. They know from the jump. They know from the time they meet you how long it's going to take. That's why they ask you, so what was your last relationship like? How long did that happen? That's so that they can measure how long it's going to take before they really bring out who they are. Because remember, we're all meeting the representative. We're not really meeting a real person. It's just the representative until they get you right where they want you. And then the abuse starts. And of course, you're not going to tell anybody because you've been bragging about this person the whole time, how wonderful they are. Oh my God, God sent me the man or woman of my life. And here it is. And now I got to come back to you and tell you that the person is abusing me. They already said victims of domestic violence are not good decision makers. So now I'm going to tell you that. And then you're going to say, well, you're not a good judge of character. So why would I tell you that? We have to also remember that men are victims too. We don't like to talk about the 15% of men that are abused by women. Mostly these are the men who were taught not to hit a woman. They were taught this in their home. You don't raise your hand no matter what. You just walk away. But the woman will walk behind them and hit them in the back and do all these other things. And what are they supposed to do? Right? We gotta bring a balance to this, because oftentimes men feel that they're being left out of the conversation because they're only referred to as the abuser. And mental illness has nothing to do with abusers. They are not mentally ill. As soon as you put the mental illness on that, then you have lost the battle, because now, oh, he's mentally ill. She doesn't know what she's doing. They know exactly what they're doing. They know what to say, when to say, how to say it. And the older they get, the more skilled they are. So they may start as a teenager, but they keep going through these relationships. All they doing is honing it in and practicing and making sure what works and what doesn't work, so that they can put it on the person. Maybe when they're in their 50s and their 60s, they're like, you know what, I really need to settle down. So let me try to control myself. But they can't, because it's going to come out, because that's all they know. They don't know what it's like to love, and they don't know what it's like to feel love. They only have an interpretation of what they think it will be, but they don't. And so what should normal people do? What you should do is have your boundaries in check. How long are you willing to be in an abusive relationship? You have that power. Although you may feel like it, you may feel this person took away your power, you can always get it back. You can always get it back. Don't think you got it. Don't settle. Do not settle. And it all comes from loving yourself. If you love yourself so much, you would not allow anybody to mistreat you. You may stay there for, the first time is okay. All right. Second time. Okay. All right. Well, how long is that though? Even if after a month you've met somebody and they start mistreating you, leave. Because that first month gave you a window into what the next few months are going to be like. They're not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
I want you.
We've got about 3 minutes, so maybe a minute and a half each, Dr. Oliver.
What I want to ask Mildred to come back, Al, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I think we're just starting this conversation.
Yeah, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about is motherhood, and the things that their wisdom associated with if your children love their father and their father's
Right.
been abusive, and he's framed their thinking associated with him. There's things mothers have to undo. And there's things
Right.
that they have to do to be able to reach their children. And Mildred's done a wonderful job of being able to do that. And that's a wisdom that I'd like her to share with the audience. And I'm going to say one thing, a couple things, and then turn it over to Dr. B. You know, the Quran has 5 ways that a man can behave in a nonviolent way towards his partner, and to do this without the use of violence. The Bible has different ways that, as a matter of fact, Ephesians 5 has conversations about how a man should treat a woman, to treat a person in a relationship. And he identifies what love is supposed to be. So the Bible provides ways and directions about how people should behave. And the thing of it is, in the same chapter that talks about women, submit yourselves to your husband, it also says submit yourselves to one another as you would unto the Lord. But people go to 522 and think that's the only verse. It's not.
We have 20 seconds, Dr. B.
Okay, 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Well, we definitely will have Sister Muhammad back in here with us. But I'd like to just close by saying that this conversation, as Black people in this country, it gives us a sense of hope that no matter what we face as women or men in this unhealthy relationships, that there is always a chance that we can be free. And sister, today, thank you for stepping up here as a free woman and trying to take all the rest of us to freedom. And with that, I pass the talking stick to Baba.
And we'll have you back, sister. That's it for today. I'm Al McFarlane. Okay. This is the conversation. Maybe next week you'll be able to come back, Sister Mildred. We'll,
absolutely,
as soon as you can, we will. Take care.
Okay.